Welcome to Fragmented, a software developer podcast where we talk about building good software and becoming better developers. My name's Donn Felker.
And I'm Kaushik Gopal.
Welcome to the show. Hey everybody, I wanted to take a quick minute before we get going to let you know about the new YouTube channel that I recently started. On this channel, I teach software developers and mobile developers, and specifically, how to become independent consultants. If you've ever wanted to become an independent consultant but weren't sure how, then this is the channel for you. I'll talk about the billing rates that you need to set, how to find clients, how to find an evergreen source of clients, how to stay on new technology trends, how to promote yourself, how to market yourself, how to get insurance, you name it. If it's around working for yourself and independent consulting and software, I'll be talking about it. Ultimately, what being an independent consultant will do for you is provide you with more financial freedom and the autonomy to work for yourself and set your own hours. This is something that appeals to a lot of people, and if it appeals to you, then please check out my YouTube channel, and you can see that at donnfelker.com/YouTube, or just check out the link in the show notes. Again, that's donnfelker.com/YouTube. That'll take you directly to the YouTube channel. Thanks for checking it out. Let's get to the show. All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. This week, we have something a little bit different. As you know, Kaushik and I have been changing things up. Unfortunately, Kaushik's not here again this week, but we're rolling solo here. And this week, we're going to be talking kind of on a different stories here about kind of some basic startup stories, generalist development, and just kind of all kinds of interesting stuff here. And I've got an old friend here who I haven't spoke to in many years, when we recently caught up, and I thought it'd be great to get him on the podcast to have him tell his various different stories, which I think everyone will find interesting. So without further ado, Jason, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's great to actually be able to have our conversation with you. It's been 8 years or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. We met. I think we met when you were working on one of your startups, right? Was it Anyfoo? Is that what it was?
Might have been, probably. Yeah, right. Because we brought you on as our Android expert, right? Because Anyfoo was sort of a place you would go to find an expert in a very specialist category, and you were the man with Android. So we got you on.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I remember. But prior to that, I found out through Anyfoo because you actually have a podcast. It's been around for you over a decade now, right?
Yeah, it's been around since 2009.
Your journey into Uber, and I think most people probably have no idea perhaps who you are, what you've done, what you've built at Uber. And so I kind of wanted to dive into that a little bit because that story is very fascinating. I mean, from what I understand, you were, in the first 10 at Uber. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, I think I would probably be number 7 or 8, depending on how you count. So
Is
here's
that when
basically
Uber
what
had
happened.
multiple cities, or how big was Uber at the time?
No, I mean, it was just in San Francisco, and it was just I don't know. I remember when Travis showed me the initial, we had this very
He's old CEO, right?
Travis Kalanick was the original CEO. He showed me the original God view, which is this very rough thing that somebody threw together probably in a few hours. And I think I saw 3 cars driving around.
Mm-hmm. Wow, just 3.
3 cars in San Francisco. I mean, that's it. I mean, it was kind of nothing, and it was Uber Cab, right?
Yeah.
So here's the basic story. Do you want me to start from?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, because it's
okay.
Interesting to see where it goes.
Okay, so I had back in the mid 2000s, I was working on a web version of PowerPoint. This is back before there was a Google Office and all that kind of stuff, or Google Docs.
That's a good one.
Yeah, so that's a whole nother story we can get to if you want. So my wife had said to me, she's like, you need to go and talk to people about what you're doing, because at this time there was no Y Combinator, there was no Hacker News, the web was still pretty much dead. Everybody was still it was like a nuclear winter after the whole .com bust in 2001, right? Which is not much going on, and I'd been madly creating this PowerPoint Ajax thing. And Ajax was like this brand, like nobody had seen anything other than Google Maps. And it seemed like magic, right? And so I started experimenting. And anyway, so skipping ahead, she's like, you need to go talk to somebody. And I said, well, there's I said, there's this guy who has this blog called TechCrunch, and he's, has been running for like a month or two, and he has like a barbecue kind of thing where like half a dozen to a dozen people show up and just kind of do a show and tell, talk about what they're doing, and I said maybe I'll go up to one of those. That would be cool. And she's like, it sounds like a great idea. So I decided to do that, but that was when it went from a 12-person barbecue to a 400-person mega party. Like it just hit this inflection point. I said, I'm going to the next one. It was literally like a month after that last small one. And I tried to sign up, and it was a wiki, and you couldn't. I was like trying to sign up, and it was like, it was like 400 was the limit. It was just like names going, da, 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 da. I'm just like, come on, for like 15 minutes, and I was like 378 or something. I get in, and I'm like, yes, I'm in. And so I get in my car. It was a week later or whatever. Kiss my wife. Drive up to San Francisco. I'm in Pasadena, outside LA, so right near the Rose Bowl and Caltech and everything. And so it's about a 6-hour drive up there, and it's in Los Altos or something. No, yeah, something like that. I don't know, really, Atherton. It's in Atherton. That's right, it's in Atherton. Uh-huh. And Mike Arrington, who ran the blog, he had this gigantic house that he was renting, this beautiful neighborhood, and I had to park like a mile away. There were so many cars. It was, literally a mile away. It wasn't just down the block. It was so packed. And so I walk up, and imagine the biggest frat party you'd ever seen. Like just people piling out of the windows, and the fact that like there was no space. So I get to the front door. I'm trying to get in. They look on the guest list. You have these like bouncers. You have all these cameras and people doing video, trying to capture the event. I get in there, and I know nobody. Mm-hmm. Not a single person. And I'm just like, yeah, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. So I'm like wandering around trying to find anybody, and I had like one name.
Could we grab your mic? It seems to be scratching. Sorry.
Is that okay? Is that
yeah,
okay? Is that better now?
Yeah.
So eventually I had one person's name that somebody had given me, Chris Messina, who was later the inventor of the hashtag, Chris Messina. So I eventually find him. I talked to him and his then girlfriend for like 5 minutes, and then it was like, okay, that ran out of gas. Like they have other people to talk to. So then I'm just like, oh, this is really awkward. You're kind of trying to walk around like you can barely get past people. And finally, I see that there's this kind of fire pit. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, and it's kind of a cool evening. And so I go stand by the fire pit, and that was perfect because you can stand by a fire pit and do nothing and not look like a moron. Like you really look like you look like a real weirdo if you're in a packed party and you're just like standing there. People are like, what is going on with that guy, right? Mm-hmm. So I said, all right, I'll go stand by. And then what would happen is somebody would inevitably come up on rotation, be like, hey man, what are you working on? Perfect, right?
Conversation.
Tom Conrad, I think, who is one of the founders of Pandora. We get to conversation, the guys who started like Google Talk or something like that. And all these interesting people right after 15-minute conversation after 15-minute conversation. It was perfect. And eventually this guy walks up and he has like this like young like VC in tow, and his name's Travis Kalanick, and he's like, hey man, what are you working on? And I said, well, I'm working on a web version of PowerPoint. He's like, what? That is amazing, and so he gets really kind of excited about that. He's like, man, I would hire you in a minute. Like, oh, we got to stay in touch. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, and sure. So anyway, we had stayed in contact after that. Mm-hmm. I co-hosted the Bar Camp LA, which if you remember the food camps and the bar camp stuff back in the unconferences. So I co-hosted that with Ian Morris and Kareem Mayan, if you know those names. Mm-hmm. And he came down. I invited him down. He came down to that. We hung out a bit, but otherwise we would just talk on the phone. Every once in a while, he'd kind of be like, hey, I'm thinking about teaching myself Python. Can you help me learn Python? And I'd be like, I'll call you back. And he'd be, hey, I got this idea. I'd get these like every 3 to 6 months, I'd get some like, random call. And then he calls me up out of the blue and he's like, hey, I got this startup I invested in. It's called UberCab. And there's a big technology play there. And I'm thinking I'm going to take over the CEO. Because they initially hired a guy, Ryan Graves, who was more of a just general business guy. Yeah. And he's like, in order to the technology play, you need someone who has some real technology chops. He's like, so he's going to be more like the president, and then I'm going to come in and be the CEO. And he's like, and you're the CTO. I was like, I am?
Of Uber, as he said. Oh my God.
Yeah. He's like, well, UberCab, right?
UberCab,
he's like, he's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, man, we're gonna blow this thing up. He's like, you move up here, we're gonna do 8-hour weeks. It's like, I'm like, screw that, man. Like 8-hour weeks. I mean, I have a wife, 3 kids. I've done the 8-hour thing. By that time, I'm 40.
Hmm.
So I'd kind of done it. I'm like, I'm not doing 80-hour weeks, especially for someone else's startup in a cab company, right?
Hmm.
I
Yeah, we
mean,
don't know. I mean, a couple of cars at that point. It's unproven. It's brand new. No one even knows what it is, really.
it's a cab company.
Yeah.
I mean, oh yeah, I want to Jason Roberts on my tombstone. Yeah, Jason Roberts. He worked on a cab. He spent his life working on a cab company. I mean, like, who wants to? I mean, I was working on one of the things I had been doing was like machine learning stuff with high frequency trading. I mean, that was
Yeah.
cool. Like you could tell people about it. People were like, wow, that's really like, oh, I work for this cab company. I mean, it just seemed really really lame. And one thing I had learned with startups is like you better work on something you really believe in, because if it doesn't work out monetarily, you're gonna look back and be really embarrassed if you spent on something you thought was kind of dumb or something,
No,
right?
that's a good point. I
And,
think people need to have that interest if they're going to be putting that much of their life into it.
yeah. And so and I had already been working, I think, on App Ignite at the time, which is my sort of like no code, you know, um, it was Bubble before there was a Bubble or something like that.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I was really excited about that. And I'm going to give that away and go, and I wasn't going to be like a 50-50 partner with him or something, right? I was going
Hmm.
to get like, what he ever said, oh, he's like, low single digits in equity. And I'm going
What
to
do
have
you
like
think
three
that
or
would have
four.
turned out to be, or if you, I mean, I have no idea what the numbers are, but let's just say you did take that and you did have single digits equity. What would it have turned out to be? Was that billions, you think?
Yeah, it would have ended in a B.
Oh, jeez. Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, I would have been a big, big, big
Big D.
number, big number. So I was like, well, and so here's the thing. But the thing is he was gonna. I said, well, Because I asked, I said, what's the deal? He's like, well, probably low single digits equity. I'm imagining that would be 3 or 4%, 5%, probably in the 2 to 5 range.
Yeah.
Probably is in the range. I'm guessing. Um, and I think it was a base salary of like 250.
Okay.
And now I had been scrounging as a freelancer and doing startups for years. So I remember walking into the bedroom after getting off the phone with Travis and talking to Sandy about it. And she's like, 250? And I was like, yeah, but we'd have to move up there to San Francisco. And my wife had just been elected to be the president of the Pasadena Junior League, which is kind of a big deal for her. And I didn't want to take that away from her. And I didn't want to be the kind of dad who flies out Monday morning and comes back Thursday night and
Yeah.
do that. And say, well, I made a lot of money, but I miss my kids growing up. Like I didn't want that to be my story.
Hmm.
So I came in there and I said, well, I kind of told her about it, and she's like, 250, work it out,
Make
work
it
it out, work it out. And the problem was, I mean, that was a big, very enticing number. I think I had been making a third of that or something or less.
That's like 12 years ago, right? Right around that area, probably, right? Yeah, so I want
Yeah,
people
that
to
would have
make
been that would have really been nice. That would have been really nice. It made our lives a lot easier because we were scraping, and then. But the thing is, Travis is like, when I initially got off the phone with him, he's like, "I'm flying down next weekend to convince you," and I was
wow.
like, "Oh shit," you know. So and Sandy's like, "Work it out," and I was just like, I'm going to get golden handcuffs here. I'm going to I'm going to work for this cab company. I'm gonna get paid a big fat salary. I'm gonna be flying. I'm gonna spend all my time flying back and forth to San Francisco, which
And
is
you're in
gonna put a
LA,
lot of
right?
stress. I'm in LA, so I mean it's not a long flight, but it's still a pain in the butt, and I don't want to be missing my kids 4 days a week. And
Of course, yeah.
and so I sent him an email and I said, hey, Travis, I really appreciate the offer, but I just can't do it. We're, whatever. It was a pretty short email, and he was like, okay. And I said, but I know you guys need a lot of help with because he had said they had a lot of problem with the architecture
Hmm.
and the algorithms. And I had a background in high frequency trading, so I was building these scalable, very real time systems, right?
Yeah.
So I knew firm out about efficient algorithms, and I built this web PowerPoint, about web and stuff. So he was like, okay, this guy's kind of like generalist, but he also knows how to make stuff really, really fast and scalable. So he was like, so I said, I'll be happy to do some consulting work for you though.
Okay.
And he was just like, okay. And then it was like a month. Oh, the funny thing was, we were so broke. I had asked him for a $2,000 advance so we could buy. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So we were so broke, I had to ask him for a $2,000 advance so that we could buy Christmas presents for our kids.
I remember that you talked about that on the podcast. I totally forgot about that.
He
I
was
remember
like,
exactly where I was at when I heard that. That's weird.
yeah, it still makes Sandy cry.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, yeah, sure, $2,000, whatever. So that's how it all happened. Now, then what the situation was? So Uber, I think, had formed like in like April or something, April of 2010. This is December of 2010.
Yeah.
And they had, my understanding is they had outsourced the initial development work to a consulting firm out of Mexico. I think Garrett had some firm that he'd worked for in the past, and he said they're inexpensive and they do good work. And initially when they were building this, they weren't actually, the initial idea wasn't Uber Cab. It was just 3 or 4 of these guys were going to get together. These guys had an exit, all had some money, but they were going to share kind of like a timeshare with a black car and a driver.
Mm-hmm.
Their whole thing was how to be baller in San Francisco. And so, because you can never get a cab in San Francisco, and so that was their idea. And the way I heard it is that Garrett Camp called Travis, and he's like, "I'm at the garage. I'm just about to sign, the contract where we're going to park the car, that kind of thing." And Travis is like, wait a minute, I got a big idea. What if anybody could, rather than just us, could share the car? We could share with anybody. And because they were already building an app which would allow you to request the car, and if it wasn't driving Garrett around or one of their buddies, then Travis could get it or something like that.
Yeah, it was shared between a few people. Yeah.
Which is why it's like, why aren't they going to spend a lot of money building this little simple app? So they just ship it to this consulting firm in Mexico or wherever, and that's what they did. Now, some of those details could be off because, again, that was before my time, but that's what I had heard about the story.
But now,
I felt like I read. I'm sorry.
No, so when you joined, though, you inherited that code, though, didn't you?
Yeah. So with Travis, so they were having a lot of problems with like no dispatches and double dispatches. So you'd request a car and the car never show up, or you'd request a car and 2 cars would show up, and there were a lot of problems, even with a small number of cars.
Do you know?
PHP.
So the first version of Uber was written in PHP. Interesting.
Yeah, so I've been planning on writing a blog post about this because I think it'd be kind of fun to read about. But it was about a 2,000-line PHP file called call flow.
Wow.
And there was one other, like, I think one other smaller script, like a cron script, but that was basically it. And it was 2,000 lines of the worst spaghetti code you'd ever seen in your life. And I've seen some bad stuff. It was, out of 1 to 10, it was definitely a 1.
Really?
I've seen a 0 before. I've seen a 0, but that was a 1.
It's pretty close, though.
It was like, so I remember, so Travis was like, hey, I'm renting a house for the holidays I'm renting a house down in Marina del Rey, which is down by the beach in Los Angeles. And he's like, why don't you come? I want you to come down and give me the architecture. He's like, I want like boxes and arrows and stuff. I'm like, all right, boxes and arrows, you got it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I walk in, I knock on the door, and this French guy answers. And I'm like, hey, is Travis here? And he's like, yeah, he's at Staples. And I'm like, okay. So I come in, and this he's kind of quiet, and we're kind of barely talking, and he's a typical kind of nerdy developer, and he doesn't know who I am or why I'm there, and I didn't really expect. So we're just sitting there, and then Travis comes in, and he has this like 3 by 4 foot whiteboard.
And he's really got one there.
Yeah, and he takes the plastic off and he sticks it on a chair, and he's like, all right, give me the architecture.
Wow. Okay, that's kind of cool though.
Yeah, and the guy who's with him, Curtis, who became the VP of engineering, and was sort of his it was sort of his go-to guy in some of his previous projects. I think he had done a lot of work at Expensify and had done a lot of the work on Red Swoosh, which is the company that Travis sold to Akamai.
Hmm.
And so Curtis is, he's just a really nice guy and really, really good developer. And so he's standing with him. Of course, I didn't know he was.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, well, first of all, I think we should build this in Node.js.
Okay.
And there's this brief pause. And then he's
This is
like,
like when like Node 0.4 was out, right? Like
yeah,
really
he's
early,
like, what? He's like, what the fuck is Node.js?
right?
He was expecting me to say C++ or I don't know, Java or whatever or something, right?
This is super
And
early
I'm
Node.
like, so if you recall, um, we had done an interview probably not long before that with Amir Salenhefendik, who went on to start Todoist,
Okay.
and he's very successful. And in the interview, he had talked about using Node.js for a real-time social network called Plurk that was big in Japan.
Okay.
And I can't remember the numbers he said, but they had 200,000 concurrent users or something big. And
Yep.
I was like, wow, that's really cool. And I had seen that same demo from Ryan Dahl where he introduced the Node at a meetup or something. And I mean, it was like one of those things that shows up on Hacker News. It's this weird new tech. You look at it, you're like, okay, whatever. That looks kind of cool. And I don't think much about it till the interview with Amir.
Hmm.
And then I'm thinking, okay, so this thing is real time. So what's happening is you have cars and clients every 4 seconds sending a request to the server.
Every 4 seconds.
There's
Oh, wow.
every 4 seconds, I think was the number. And it was just sort of these XML messages, basically like, here I am, here's my latitude, longitude, this is my status if you're a driver. I'm open, I'm off duty, I'm on a trip. And the client the client could be I'm looking, I'm requesting a trip, so it's just, so they would come in and then the call flow script would kind of go and would hit the database and be like, okay, this driver client, it was hitting the database every time, right?
Hmm.
And so what happening is once they got to a certain number of users, it's just like it started just grinding the database,
Yeah.
right? And I was like, okay, it totally makes sense when you have like 4 or 5 people sharing a car, right?
Yep.
It does not make sense once you get to hundreds and or thousands of people at all. And so I don't mean to throw the original developers under the bus. They will probably just say, hey, can you give us a little thing, little mobile app that does
Yeah.
this thing, and our budget's $4,000 or
They
whatever.
built what they needed. I mean, that is what it is.
Yeah, we've all done it, man. Like whatever. Like, hey, you want something in 3 weeks or 6 weeks, and
There
okay,
you go.
and so then I look at this script, and I think, and I initially seen a copy before I did the architecture. They'd sent me the call flow script and the other 2 or 3, and I initially looked at this thing. And I was just like, ooh, like it was like if else if switch if else for loop lift up. You're just like, I've no idea what's going on.
Just
Like
mess.
this
Yeah.
is it is just like, oh, come on. And but I had them send me some logs. So every outgoing incoming message got written to a log file.
Okay.
And one thing about the messages is that one thing was consistent is they were all completely different. Some was elements, some of it was attributes. Some, we just it was like
It's a smattering of everything.
there was no schema. There was no schema. It was like, I don't know. I guess they're just, and it was XML, so it was really hard to read, and then it was just a consistent. It was just it was again, it was just prototype. It was just a prototype someone threw together just to get something barely working, and amazingly, it started to work. And then you have he had hired this guy Conrad and the guy Ryan, and Conrad was sort of in charge of keeping this thing alive.
Okay.
And he's just like doing everything he can to keep this thing running and burning out the database server and stuff. And I remember looking at this and thinking, okay, so we want like a persistent process running. So like my background in high frequency trading, it's like, okay, you subscribe to 100 or 500 different stocks
Yep.
that are just traded, and they could get like 20 updates a second or more, right?
Hmm.
A lot more these days, but back then that was a lot. So you're thousands of updates coming in of quote, the bid ask quote and trades and all stuff. So you're certainly not like sticking stuff in the database and loading it back up.
Yeah.
Like that would be stupid, right? So you have like C++ or Java or whatever, and it's a continually running process, has socket connections. You just update objects, right? Like this is the stock object, and this is the new bit ask, and this is the whatever, and you make decisions and do stuff. And I said, okay, that's essentially what we want to do. One persistent process running, but I was like, I don't want to do C++. That's just asking for trouble because you
Been
want
down that
something to
road.
yeah. And
Your reaction.
I don't know. I'd done 5 years. That was my initial language as a professional was C++. So I spent 5 years, but doing multi-threaded socket-based stuff with C++ is just and plus we didn't need that level of scale, right? It's not like they had like a million cars,
Yeah.
right? And like 20 cars or 15 cars, and they might get a couple hundred at some point. It's like okay. And I was like, and I'm not really a Java guy. And back then it was all like, remember that enterprise Java beans got like really overdone, over-engineered?
Back then was huge.
And nobody wanted. It's a I got a point with so engineered you couldn't even. It was like impossible to even use Java. And so I was like, I don't want any part of that nonsense. So that's when I thought of the Node.js stuff, and I said, okay, that could be the perfect combination because you have this persistent running process with Node, as opposed to a script like PHP or Python or Ruby that just gets called upon a web request.
Yeah.
And I said it's just easy and fast to write, and much easier to find people who can write that stuff. So that's why I said we should build a Node.js. And after Travis says, "What the fuck?" Curtis is like, "Oh yeah." He's like, "Yeah, I love JavaScript." And he had built like a lot of the real time distributed stuff for Red Swoosh. So he had done a lot of networking, massively distributed stuff. So he was
Yeah.
he was not a rookie, and he immediately saw, huh. And I remember, so we started working on it. So it's like there was like half a dozen people at this house, or maybe less, maybe five or something like that. And first thing I say to Curtis, I said, "All right, I don't think we should like just rebuild the PHP script. I think we should go through a series of refactorings. We don't want to fall victim to the second system syndrome." Are you
Yeah.
familiar with that
It's
term?
a Polsky thing, right?
Yeah, so it's like you've ever heard of Netscape 5.0, right?
Yeah, but give background for the folks that are probably not familiar.
Yeah, so Netscape 4.0 was very popular, and that's when right in the middle of the browser wars and stuff, and whatever the engineering team, whoever it was at the time, they made an argument to management. It's like, we have to rewrite this stuff. It's all spaghetti code.
Yeah.
And so they tried to rewrite it, I think, from C into C++, and of course, it never saw the light of day.
Yeah. Just
Um,
typical rewrite problem right there.
yeah, so you rewrite something from scratch. So I'm thinking I'm being really pragmatic. Oh, we're not going to rewrite it. We're just going to kind of refactor this, and we evolve it into something. And so I went back into another room and I'm working on this. And I come to, and Curtis is like, okay, well, you're doing that. I'm going to try and like do some forensic analysis on these database tables, because the database tables were a mess as well, and just
Mhm.
like everything else. And I come back to an hour later. I'm like, forget everything I just said. This is a total rewrite. I have no idea what this is doing.
This is too much to
And
hear.
it was like a Rube Goldberg machine.
Yeah.
And there's no documentation. It just didn't make any sense. And I said, all right, what I think I should do is I should reverse engineer the behavior of the expected behavior of the system based on the log of messages, incoming and outgoing messages.
Mhm.
And so that's what I did. I started building a Node.js dispatch server that would, you know, receive and deal with these messages. So you have your list of clients, your list of drivers. Message gets from the client looking for a trip. Who's the closest driver? Assign it. Send out a request to the driver. Hey, you want this trip? No. Okay, let's do the next closest one. Okay, you want it? Okay, that kind of thing.
Did you write to a database a lot during this time, or was it all more of like using the same methodologies that you had used in high frequency trading?
Yeah. So no. So at the time, it was a MySQL database, and so what I'm trying to think. Now, when I built this initial version, what I did is I created some sort of like, I can't remember if they're mocks or stubs, but just sort of fake API requests like save trip or update trip. So I would call some, and then essentially would in theory would update the database. So I just built this thing, but the test is funny. Initially, I built like a little GUI representing the client app and a little GUI representing the driver app. And then you're like, okay, request trip. Okay, go over here and accept, or no, reject. Okay, get the next one. And after about an half hour of that, I'm like, this is bullshit. Like, I'm not doing this. Like, this is stupid. And so I said, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a simulator where I can say, okay, create 10 drivers and 10 clients, and they randomly show up on this latitude longitude grid, and they randomly will ask for a trip and then cancel it, or then they, if they accept it, then they want to go from here to some other part. And so it's just some basic, random logic with some randomness thrown in, and it would go through all the different behaviors that it could handle. And that turned out to be inadvertently like extremely useful. So I was able to build all of these APIs, build all the infrastructure, and you could just turn the simulator and put 100 drivers, 100 clients, and be like, go, and be like,
See what
and
happens.
you could see us moving around, and then of course eventually something would happen. There'd be some race condition or some weird situation where somebody accepted and then a trip and then cancel it and this and that, and it caught all that. And then what happened later is that the simulator was this like ultimate sanity check. So even if you wrote like some unit test and you checked your code, it's like you had to run on the simulator for like 20 minutes to make sure that everything was cool,
Because it
and that
just
would
ran through all these
capture.
different variations and, cancellations, and like you said, race conditions, it would run through everything.
Exactly, and it was basically because I was too lazy to manually test it, but it turned out to be extremely useful for years. I remember, so Amos, who was he was like a young junior dev, he's like 2 years out of college maybe, and he kind of started to help. When I initially went up to Uber, I hadn't been up there so this is like, so we go for like, call it November 2011, so almost a year.
So
Well, actually, let me.
is the thing you created, is that also, was that part of the higher end, like, God view thing, or no? Which we'll get to later.
No, Godview was also something I built during that time. But so I should back up a little bit though first.
'Cause that's
So
interesting because it was all over the news and everything, so
yeah, okay, so I'll get to Godview in a second, but so I'm building this starting in like December, January,
yeah.
and uh, I have like three other clients.
Oh,
Like, I'm
man.
building Uber's real time system, and it's just one of three or four clients. And Sandy would rather come in as she would do like once a week. So, are you finished with that? Because we need to send an invoice because we got to pay our mortgage, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, I got to get back on Uber, right? I gotta, because you know how it is when you're a freelancer, you always have two or three projects, and no matter what you're doing, you're always behind on one.
Mhm. Yeah, when you've
And
got
then before
multiple
you send the
projects.
invoice, yeah, before you send the invoice, you got to make sure it works. I mean, you got to make sure you've done your stuff. Um, so I'm building this with these other projects. Finally, we launch it. I send the code up to, or we commit the code, and Curtis kind of does his thing. We kind of merge it with his connection node stuff, which was sort of a horizontally distributed thing that it would take in connections and sort of, if it needed to buffer them before going into the actual dispatch server, it would. And we turned this thing on, and it was so fast that people thought it was broken. Like, it was like 0% CPU.
Oh, really? Wow.
Like, you couldn't even tell it was working, or 0.1% or something. It was like so small, and it was so fast because typical the drivers and the clients would typically, there's a lot of lag. There was before, and you'd have to wait. And so would like, you'd request trip, and it's like immediately you're like, whoa, whoa, something's not working.
That's too
Right?
fast.
It was doing like something broken. It was so, and it was just because of Node, right? You're not hitting the database, and of course we would asynchronously fire off, update database methods, but it wasn't like the synchronous PHP type of thing.
Mhm.
So that was really amazing. That worked great. And so I had so it was funny because when they launched it, when my wife and I went to a wedding in Europe, so we were gone for like 2 weeks, and it was all on Curtis to kind of like do all the error handling and bring it to life, which he did. But I had never been up to San Francisco, right?
Even at that point, you hadn't. Wow, okay.
Curtis would fly down about once every 3 to 4 weeks and hang out with me for like 4 or 5 days, and we would kind of brainstorm and come up with ideas because he's writing the connection node stuff, and we just making this crap up.
So you and him are writing the entire early Uber dispatch system, you and him just hacking away in your little office.
That's right. My little condo office in Pasadena
Wow.
was not in this like co-working space in San Francisco with a bunch of 20 something engineers. It's like you know, middle-aged guy and, guy, we're just making this stuff up, going to lunch at Pollo Loco every day, and you know. So I remember calling him one time, and I'm like, "Hey, just hey, what's up?" He's like, "Oh, I'll have to call you back later. I got an interview." I'm like, "Interview for what?" He's like, "Oh, for developers." I'm like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "He's like, we got to hire developers." What? We got this. What are you talking about? Like, we don't need other
Good.
developers.
Look at the CPU usage. We're good.
Look at this, man. I mean, I only do three other projects. I mean, what are you even talking about? And he's like, he just laughed. He's like, no, Travis wants X number of developers by the end of the year. And I'm like, I never thought about it in that way. Like, I want X number of developers, you
Which is
know?
interesting because, I mean, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but I know you were at Uber for multiple years, but towards the end of your time there, you would go in. You had told me that you would go into the office and walk floors of engineers and be like, I don't know anybody here. There's so many people, and it happened to be that you were one of the first there to develop the reason why all those people are there is just amazing.
Yeah. What was, yeah, so you're referring to a particular or a specific instance in like April. I think it was April 2016 was my last trip up there. I'd already decided that was gonna, peel off because all my options had vested. But that's a whole other story,
Yeah.
and it was
You weren't full
impossible
time
to
this whole
work.
time. You're still consulting. So I want people to remember that, right? You're still
I was
consulting,
a consultant. Yeah, I was a
but you
consultant.
had a weird option agreement, which we can get to another time.
Yeah, but later at the end of the at that when I left or when I was last, there was like 1,000 developers, and I didn't know anybody. I walked for 3 floors for an hour. I didn't run into a single person I knew. I was like, wow, this is I said this is clearly the time to go. But so going back to 2011, when I was going to fly up there, they're all like, "Oh, you got to come up, man. You got to meet the team." And I'm like, "There's a team?" They're like, "There's a team."
What?
Who's what team? What are you talking about? And they're like, "Yeah, you got." I'd be talking to Curtis on Skype or something, and Travis like, "Yeah, man, what's up? What's up? You got to come up." And I'm like, "All right." And so I figured, well, and Sandy's like, "You really should go up there. You should go up there and
Yeah.
see what's going on." I'm like, because I'm happy just to sit in my hobbit hole and do my thing. And she's always like, "You need to get out,
Yeah.
talk to human beings." So so she's like, "Well, if you're going to go up there, you're going to need an iPhone because you can't use your flip phone to get an Uber." Because I still had a flip phone,
In 2011? That's funny.
clamshell. Yeah, and she's just like, so she's like, "Don't worry, I'll go buy it and I'll figure out how it works for you."
That's funny.
So she gets me the iPhone, and I finally, like the day before I go up there, and then I go up there and install the Uber app. And I remember I get to SFO, San Francisco Airport. I get there, and I'm like, how the hell does this thing work? Because I never actually used the app.
Working on the back end dispatch for so long.
Yeah, and I call up Curtis. I'm like, "Curtis, what is this like flag thing? What is this pin? How do I?" And you hear him, and he kind of repeats it, and you hear these people laughing in the background. It's like, Jason doesn't know how to use the Uber. This is
Oh, that's
the app.
so funny.
So yeah, I came. So I came up there, and um, that was around the time early on, and we don't have to go that into it, but you know, Travis, he said, "Hey, listen, all right, you built a lot of great stuff. You deserve some equity." I'm
Yeah.
like, "Great, thanks." I mean, because I thought I'd missed that. Like I had, Curtis would come down and be like, "Oh, we just got a round of funding from Benchmark. We raised $10 million," and I'm just like, "Oh, that I missed this, didn't I?" Because initially he'd say, "Oh, we have like 100 users or 1,000 users." I'm like, "Wow, our code's working. People are using it." And then I'd hear the money that was coming in, and I was just like, "Oh my god, I
Damn it.
really, really, really missed this." But I could have jumped on then. I could say, "Travis, for what I said back in December, I'm in," right?
Yeah.
But I was too stubborn. I was too stubborn, and eventually, I think Travis. I think one, he probably wanted to lock me in full time, because I had built a lot of the core stuff. It's like, hey, you probably want this guy around for a while.
Yeah.
Um, and two, I think he said good guy. I think Travis gets a little bit of a bad rap sometimes in the press, but I think he was like, hey, you deserve some equity. I mean, this would be pretty, you
Yeah.
know, and pretty bad if you didn't. And so um, he comes back and he gives me an option grant.
Okay.
and it's and I think the total value I think was like 7,000 options for like a $2 strike or something, $14,000,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was like a 4-year vest.
You're like, for
I'm like,
$14,000. Oh gosh.
I'm not sticking around here for 4 years for $14,000, right? I
Yeah.
mean, right? Come on, I mean, I'm like, it was nice though, but it was like if somebody come to me and say, "Hey, Jason, hey, I'm not going to use this. Here's $100 Amazon gift card," and you're like, "Thanks,"
Yeah.
and then you put it in your wallet and you forget about it because that's what
Mhm.
you do, and then till you remember to do it, you get it, and then it's expired or whatever, and so I I was like, okay, I'll probably stick around here for now, probably on and off consulting for 6 months or a year or something. So a little bit of it will vest, and
Yeah.
that'll be it. But it was around, I think maybe 2012 or 13, and I was like, I remember turning to Sandy, I go, "Have you seen that option grant?"
'Cause
And
things are
she's
going
like, "No."
gangbusters at Uber at that point, right?
I'm like, "Oh my god!" And because I would fly, and one part of the agreement was that I would fly up there once a month or once every 3 weeks. And so I'm seeing this thing like stop motion with just like boom, boom, like double in size every month. It was crazy, right? And I'm seeing this thing go. We're in San Francisco now. We're in Boston and Seattle, and now we're in New York and London and LA. And you're just like, holy crap! And so so I asked her if she'd seen it because I couldn't find my option grant.
Oh.
And I was just like, I put it on my desk with my pile of papers. You know how that is, and it'll get thrown away or something.
Yep.
And so I'm like, isn't that perfect? Like I lost my option grant. I was like, I know what's gonna happen. I'm gonna call them up and they're gonna be like, yeah, we don't have a record of that. That's kind of up to you to keep track of. Like you just expect
Yeah.
that kind of
You
crap.
just know that's gonna happen.
So I call up Jesse, who was then the he was like the director of finance or finance manager or something. I'm like, hey Jesse, do you have a copy of my consulting agreement? He's like, oh yeah, yeah. And I go, and my option grant? He's like, "Oh yeah, I'm sure I do. Yeah." So I was like, "Oh, thank God." You know. So luckily, I was like, "Whew." So that $14,000 obviously became worth quite a bit more. I was like,
Oh, yeah.
"Oh, we might be able to send our kids to college with this money. Like this could be real."
Yeah.
Um, and it turned out to be even better than that. But I mean, again, compared to if I had taken a CTO position, it was nothing. It
Yeah.
was not even a rounding error.
So,
But you know,
that's amazing that, oh, the CTO thing, and that I'm glad you were able to get that stock option grant thing back during because otherwise that would have been like just a really sad ending of the story.
Oh, so sad. I know. It was so
Um,
sad. Yeah.
when
But oh, you asked about Godview? Did you want me to
Yeah,
talk
that's
about
an
that?
interesting, so what was Godview? I mean, it did show up in the news for a while 'cause a lot of people were freaking out about it, that everyone knew where all the cars were at, but back then when you guys built Godview, that was never the intention, and kinda wanna see if you could give a little rundown of that.
Yeah, so I mean, pretty early on, I started working on Godview as well as Dispatch. I mean, you got to remember that there was like
And what is
Jordan and Godview is just a way of you could look at a city, and at the time when we first started, it was only San Francisco, and you could see the cars driving around where they were, and you could see clients were like little eyeballs looking, and then you could see, oh, this client is on a trip and they're driving around, so you could kind of see a real time snapshot of what the heck was going on.
Yeah.
So really, it was like a debugging tool, and it was a tool for operations to see what's going on. So if like if a client comes up and says, I my Uber is supposed to be here 10 minutes ago, it's still not here, like they could say, oh, he's 3 blocks away, or you could see what's going on, right?
Yeah.
You can see a list of names of the clients and drivers on the side. I kind of built it. I kind of stole the look and feel of like Google. I mean, yeah, Google Maps,
Mhm.
and you have that kind of slide out, and you can see like restaurants and stuff. I kind of
Yeah.
used their design as a template for what I did, and it was cool. You'd have once later you'd have so many cars that looked like flies on a carcass. Like you couldn't even see the city. It was just all cars
Wow,
everywhere,
that's amazing.
just and it was neat, and then you could select only show me cars that are on trips or that are on duty or whatever, and it would have their names next to it, so you could see like, okay, so this guy's driving here, I can see what the problem is you know
Okay.
I mean, imagine if you you know you order something from Amazon and they have no idea where your order is because they don't look at orders. Like it's, I don't know, like
I don't know. It's on check somewhere.
somebody has to look at to be able to track this stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
it's in the database. It's in so our stuff is not only in the database, but it's in the real time system. And so it was built as a just to stay on top of things, and so our operations people could solve problems for the drivers and the clients, right?
And so
And
you built that and you had to maintain it though, right? For a long time, right?
yeah, I want to say probably and through like mid 2013, 2014 kind of
So
range.
is it, so at that point, did you just stop working on it, or what happened after that to it, or did it morph into something else?
Yeah, so it was like I went on my monthly trip up, and this is when we had moved over. This is like our third office since I had been there. We were in the Yelp office, Yelp's old office, and the real time team had expanded to like probably 30 people at that point, just the real time people. So this is just the stuff that I built, right? Was
Yeah.
now like I just expanded out, and I come up and I look and I see this kind of thing. It looks like God view, but it's like way slicker. And I'm like, whoa, what's that? And nobody says anything. All these like coder was just like quietly coding, and I'm like, what's up? Like, wait, what's
Don't look
this?
at Jason.
And finally someone goes, yeah, so we built a new version of Godview, and there was like a team of 7 of us, and we worked on it for the last couple of months. Nobody really knew how to break the news to you. I'm like, I don't care. It looks awesome. I mean,
Like, I don't have to
I
work
was
on it
like,
anymore.
yeah, I don't have to babysit this thing anymore. It was like my buddy Phil always says, like, yeah, never write code that you don't want to maintain for the rest of your life.
It's true. I, I think in a previous conversation we talked about like how that was built with all kinds of bells and whistles and different technologies and stuff like that, and yours was a much more simpler thing, and it would kind of back into the discussion that we got into at the time, which was kind of like generalist software development versus specialized software development. And I was wondering how you felt about that. Are you more of a generalist or specialist, and what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think you and I are similar in that way. Is that I'm a definitely generalist. I'm not
Yeah.
great at any one thing. I can do a lot of things passably well, from UI stuff to database to everything in between. And I'm more like about just like let's get something working. I mean,
Yeah.
let's write clean code. Let's use the right tools for the job and stuff. But it's more like okay, we have like 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever it is. Let's get something up, right? And I always just like refer myself as special forces. Like, okay, you get like a small team of like highly trained people who are highly trained, or at least trained across a variety of specialties, and they can do all kinds of things. You drop them in, they can do a lot of damage. Just
Yeah.
like 5 or 6 or 10 of them or whatever it is. Um, Regular army, you have these people who really just do one thing and that's what they're trained. They do it well, and that's what scales, right? You get
Hmm.
these people who are amazing front end developers, or amazing UI designers, or UX people, or amazing node people, or whatever, and
Yeah.
that's just a different type of person, and those are the kind of people who tend to be more comfortable and more successful at larger companies or larger startups, because like I can slot in here and I can do my magic and I can really make this thing well. But if someone says,
Yeah.
hey, I'm the guy who called me, hey Jason, like we need like a whole new dispatcher, can you build that? And yeah, oh, and here's a God view, and could you build a God view for us? And I'm like, all right, just
Just
sure,
get it
put
done,
something
and
together.
get it done and ship it. And I think that's the thing you said is like you get in there, you're able to ship it. And being a generalist, that gives you that ability because you have that experience with databases. And I'm not that, no one's going to hire me to optimize a Postgres database. That's not my thing. But I can get in there and I know exactly how to build one and set it up and use it. But I may not be the person to talk to about optimizing a trigger. Like, I don't know. I'll have to dig into that for a while.
Well, and see, when you're starting out, you really need to be able to have all of these different skills available so you can connect them all up and say, okay, this is how I want everything to work. It doesn't have to be a series of meetings and memos and I can just put it in my head and be like, okay, this is what we're gonna do,
Yep.
and get something working. And eventually stuff gets rebuilt and rebuilt again and rebuilt again. I mean, if you go look at Uber, I mean, the code that I had originally written had been rebuilt numerous times. Because when
Yeah.
you go from 10 cars to 100 cars to 1,000 cars to 10,000, 100 million, it's like now you're multiple cities and you have all this kind of stuff. It's like just different solutions are needed, but you don't try and build that solution at first, because first of all, you can't even test it really. It's like, well, you don't need it. Though we need something like now. Like I don't need something that can run the space shuttle. I just need something that's going to work in a month
And
and
that's
not
a
break and do things.
goes back to the company that built the app before you were there. They built the exact thing that they needed for 3 or 4 cars or 3 or 4 people, and that worked, and think a lot of engineers suffer from that problem of just trying to optimize too early of like, "Well, we're gonna need to make sure we can scale this way and scale that way," and, I think some of the best advice I can get is like, "No, you don't need that." Yagni applies right there. You're not gonna need that right now. Don't worry about it. We'll worry about that later. And I think
Yeah,
there's an
solve
art to
today's
that too.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Solve today's problem. You can look a little bit ahead, say, well, we're going to need to scale a little bit, but you got to be careful when you're trying to predict the future.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, it's 37 signals. They've talked a lot about that, which is like make small decisions, don't make big decisions, make lots of small decisions. You have more because you have more. If you wait, you'll have more information
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
about the problem. So yeah, I mean, I had done this in the high frequency trading world before, where I had built like the entire platform of order servers and quote servers and trading UIs and trading. I mean, and I had to do it all myself,
Yeah.
right? So guess what? I built it in Visual Basic.
It's what worked at the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I built it in VB6. It was like Visual Basic, and I'm like, dude, because I can write this at like 10 times faster than C++.
Yeah.
And I was a C++ developer. I can write this multi-threaded, multi-process, socket-based, blah blah blah. I can write the server code. I can write the UIs and all that stuff in Visual Basic. And Visual Basic was kind of like a poor man's Python.
Mhm.
You could write you could do object-oriented programming, and you didn't have inheritance, but you could implement interfaces, and you could write clean object-oriented stuff. Like you look at it, you'd be like, oh yeah, it looks kind of like Python, a little more verbose, but it's like pretty simple. And it compiled down, used the C front compiler, so it compiled down to C or C++. So
Yeah. I
it
mean,
was
it
fast,
worked.
and
Mhm.
it worked.
Yeah,
It
I think
worked.
some of the first apps I
So
wrote were in VB6 as well. So that's a little throwback there. Well, Jason,
right,
there's
but
a
you
ton
remember
of
how
stuff.
you remember how
Go ahead.
productive you were. You remember how
Oh, God.
productive you were with that stuff, right?
A ton, yeah, there's so much stuff that I shipped. I mean, very early on I one of my first jobs in tech was working for Target, which was their, Target's credit card. And we wrote a bunch of apps in VB6 to automate all kinds of internal processes for their credit division. I mean, that's just the
Right.
tool we had that allowed us to ship it because otherwise their internal teams that were up in Minneapolis at the time just couldn't get to it for 6 to 10 months. So we just
Right.
learned it and shipped it. It is what it is.
That's right.
So
That's right. So I don't think I think a lot of people get really kind of embarrassed about using certain tools as opposed to other ones. It's like, oh, real men use C++ or whatever it is.
hmm
And it's like, you know, real coders ship. They ship
yeah.
stuff that works, they ship it on time, and they ship stuff that doesn't crack. And that's really what you want. And obviously you try and write the cleanest code you can with the tools you have, but you don't, like you said, you don't want to jump the gun in terms of premature optimization or premature generalization. All those things are kind of roads to hell. You know,
yes.
those are what the junior devs who are like 1 or 2 years out. They're like, oh, I'm gonna generalize make this whole thing, and you're just, please don't. You know,
Yeah.
like,
They require
just
a little bit of guidance to kind of get them back on the rails. It's I like the enthusiasm, but we have to kind of help reel them in. That's kind of the key there.
exactly.
Jason, we could talk about Office G2, which is a product that you built, your multiple other things you've worked on, and Math Academy. But we're running out of time today. I'm gonna have to bring you back to talk about these other ones because I really want to pick your brain about just starting these projects, which have been things you have built yourself and have grown them to either point of almost acquisition, or even the things that you're working on right now with your Math Academy. So we'll have to bring you back for another episode. But before
Great.
we get going, is there if folks wanted to get a hold of you or see what you're working on, or if you want to talk a little bit about what you're working on, how can they get in contact and what are you working on?
So, well, first I just say I just brought my Twitter account back to life. So you can come to exojason, EXO Jason.
Okay.
I have like 250 followers, so get in early.
Put a link
Get
in
a
the
seat
show
at the
notes.
table. Yeah, so that'll have link. I'm trying to post pretty regularly on the stuff I'm working on and things. It has links to the podcast and to my my website codasoperandi.com and all that. So my current project is a Math Academy, which is, I guess what I would say is, think of Duolingo, but for math.
Okay.
You
That's
know,
interesting.
but where Duolingo is kind of like not super serious in terms of like it tries to get you to be fluent, but it's more about gamification and make as much progress you can. Our system is like really serious.
Okay.
But yeah, it's everything from fifth grade math up through things like differential equations and abstract algebra. So we're going to be launching it this later this summer. So I've been working on that for years. So it's probably a whole long discussion. But if that thing sounds interesting to you, come to come to my Twitter account. You can kind of keep
Okay.
abreast of that.
Yeah, and if you have any links or whatever, we'll add them to the show notes. We'll put links to your social handle, your website, and stuff like that. And we'll have to get you back on so we can discuss some more of the stuff. So you have a lot of interesting insights that I want to dig further into. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Cool. Well, and folks, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Hey everybody, thanks for staying on and listening to the show. Before we get going here and head on out, just want to remind you to please check out the YouTube channel. That's going to be at donnfelker.com/YouTube. You're going to learn everything you need to know about how to become an independent consultant as a mobile developer or just even a software developer in general. I'll teach you from the ground up everything you need to know and that much more. I look forward to seeing you over there. Again, that's going to be at donnfelker.com/YouTube or just check the link in the show notes. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good day.
That's it for the show, folks. Fragmented is hosted by Donn Felker and me, Kaushik Gopal. We edit and produce all the episodes here on Fragmented. You can find more Fragmented episodes at fragmentedpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode.